Kalen Voss had faced down plasma rifles, bureaucratic tribunals, and once even a very confused pack of carnivorous swamp dwellers on Delta 4 who thought his boots were mating calls. But as he stood half-dressed in the great ceremonial chamber of Gentle Prime, surrounded by towering Vireland dignitaries, swirling incense, and one very observant translator drone, he realized nothing, not even swamp boot romance, had prepared him for this. "I still think this is a prank," he muttered, tugging at the collar of his diplomatic uniform, which suddenly felt 10 degrees too tight. His voice echoed awkwardly through the domed marble chamber, amplified by architecture specifically designed for dramatic pronouncements, not insecure muttering. A Vireland attendant, draped in silver silk and carrying a staff that may or may not have been decorative, gave him a solemn nod. "You stand at the threshold of convergence, Commander. Prepare to be unveiled." "Unveiled," Kalen repeated, as if hoping saying it aloud would make it more metaphorical. But it was, not even close. At the far end of the chamber, Queen Selari stood poised on a raised platform, haloed in warm bioluminescent light. Her gown shimmered with every movement, a flowing mix of woven starlight and cultural intimidation. Her long, pointed ears, signature trait of her people, were adorned with ceremonial rings. Her pale skin was flawless, her expression unreadable, a living embodiment of elegance. And currently watching him with mild interest, like one might observe a confused fish trying to solve a puzzle. "Is it too late to propose a handshake instead?" Kalen asked the attendant. No reply. As per Vireland custom, the human diplomat was to remove the outer layers of his clothing, symbolizing transparency, trust, and vulnerability. Kalen suspected it also symbolized supreme embarrassment and universal mockery, but that part hadn't made it into the briefing notes. He took a deep breath and slid off his jacket, careful to fold it over his arm. If he was going to be undressed in front of alien royalty, he might as well stay tidy. The air in the chamber was cool, perfumed with something that smelled like mint, ozone, and mild anxiety. "You may proceed," a voice intoned. It came from the central drone, floating above them with the smugness of someone who'd never had to drop their pants for diplomacy. Kalen looked up. "You sure this isn't televised? Because I swear I saw a blinking red light." Queen Selari stepped forward, graceful and fluid. "No looking," she said suddenly, her voice melodic with the barest edge of a smirk. She turned away theatrically, long hair cascading over one shoulder like she'd rehearsed this moment for a play she never told him he was starring in. Kalen froze, then blinked. Did she just was that humor? The drone beeped. "The Queen has invoked the right of partial modesty. It is rare." "Fantastic," Kalen muttered, slipping off his shirt with one hand while trying to cover himself with the other. "I'm part of a rare event. That'll look great on my tombstone." The ritual lasted precisely 7 minutes and 23 seconds. Kalen knew because he counted every second while praying not to trip, sneeze, or suffer an unexpected wardrobe malfunction. There were drums. There were chants. There was a moment where an elder Vireland tapped his forehead with a crystal and whispered something that might have been a blessing or an insult. Finally, clothed again and slightly less pink in the face, Kalen approached the Queen's platform. The formal exchange was to begin now. Gifts would be offered, words spoken, treaties hinted at. Nothing in the treaty drafts had prepared him for the Queen's dry amusement or the way her eyes held just a little more light than protocol allowed. "You performed the rite adequately," she said, studying him like a scientist might a slightly misbehaving molecule. "I'll try not to let that go to my head," Kalen replied, then added quickly, "Your Majesty." "You trembled." "I was cold, and possibly allergic to incense." Her mouth twitched, not quite a smile but something close. "Humans are strange. You perform combat rituals with explosives and swearing, but this is what unsettles you." "To be fair, I usually don't have to undress in front of artillery either." She turned fully now, descending the steps of the dais with a calm that suggested either confidence or deep amusement. "Perhaps you should consider it. It might distract your enemies." Kalen snorted before he could stop himself. "I'll have the Alliance generals added to our next combat doctrine." They walked together toward the hall's exit, trailed by silent guards and the ever-hovering drone, which was still beeping ominously and likely compiling embarrassing quotes for posterity. Salari's stride was purposeful but not rushed. She walked beside him, not ahead. "I expected a more formal approach," she said quietly. "You make jokes. I make peace too, sometimes both at once. Your peace comes with sarcasm. Intriguing tactic. Better than coming with demands." She paused. "Is that your way of saying you expect nothing from this alliance?" "No," Kalen said, meeting her gaze. "It's my way of saying I'm not here to conquer your culture. Just to understand it. Even if that involves confusing rituals, questionable fashion, and very flattering lighting." She tilted her head, ears angling slightly. "You noticed the lighting?" "Only because I looked up and thought. Ah yes, the spotlight every man dreams of, half-naked under alien scrutiny." The drone, perhaps growing weary of the lack of tension, buzzed lower. Salari stopped just before the grand doors opened, looking at him. "We begin talks tomorrow. Your sense of humor may not serve you well in formal discourse." "I'm adaptable," he said. "I can even be boring if necessary. I once went 12 minutes without making a joke." She raised an eyebrow. "It was awful," he added. The Queen finally truly smiled. Not the polite, regal mask she wore at ceremonies, but something warm, genuine, and dangerous. "Then let us see how long you last tomorrow." As the doors opened and the chill evening air of Gentle Prime swept in, Kalen thought two things. One, diplomacy was weirder than any war he'd ever fought. And two, he might already be losing the most important negotiation of his life, because the Queen of Virla had just smiled at his joke. And that smile had changed everything. The Virlan High Council's diplomatic chamber was circular, echo-prone, and terrifyingly symmetrical, three traits Kalen Voss had come to associate with both alien architecture and poorly designed corporate meeting rooms. Seated at a crystalline table so polished he could see his own regret in the reflection, he tried to look composed. He adjusted his collar. He adjusted his wristband. He adjusted his expectations. None of it helped. Queen Salari sat at the opposite end of the table, regal as ever, flanked by two of her advisors who looked like they hadn't smiled since the last lunar eclipse. One of them, Counselor Vreth, bore the expression of someone who had swallowed a lemon and discovered it had opinions. "We will now begin formal negotiation regarding the terms of long-standing planetary autonomy and shared orbital trade routes," Vreth intoned, voice like a thunderstorm wrapped in red tape. Kalen leaned slightly forward. "Happy to begin. Would anyone like to start with a joke to ease the mood?" Absolute silence. Salari blinked slowly. "This is not the time for levity, Commander." "Of course not," Kalen said, straightening. "I'll save my best ones for the post-treaty feast. I hear your species is weak to puns." Vreth actually growled, which was both surprising and impressive considering he had no visible throat. Hours passed, or felt like it. Virlan diplomacy operated with the speed and grace of a melting glacier. Every phrase was examined, every syllable parsed, until even the word agreement seemed to buckle under existential pressure. Kalen tried to stay attentive, but the tea they had served him contained trace stimulants and a mild hallucinogen. At one point, he was fairly certain Vreth's eyebrows tried to negotiate separate terms. He caught Salari's eye once. Just once. She didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth moved like it wanted to. By the second hour, Kalen had found a rhythm. Nod respectfully, offer a human proverb, translate it when it failed. Dodge a philosophical ambush from Counselor Lethes about the ethics of interspecies food commerce. Make a sarcastic comment under his breath and pretend the translator drone had glitched. During the break, he wandered into the side atrium, where glowing flora clung to the ceiling and emitted soothing ultraviolet light. He was halfway through a protein bar of questionable origin when Sailari appeared beside him. "I'm surprised you haven't surrendered yet," she said. "Are you kidding? I've fought bureaucrats before. This is nothing. I once had to fill out 16 forms just to requisition a coffee machine." "That explains your stamina," she replied, glancing at the wrapper in his hand. "That's not food, by the way. That's ceremonial bait." He froze. Ceremonial bait. For violent ice serpents, usually used during frost hunts. Kalen looked down at the bar, then at his mouth. "Oh good, maybe it'll kill me and save me from another 3-hour discussion on mineral tariffs." She laughed, actually laughed, and the sound echoed gently under the atrium's dome. "You're an unusual diplomat, Commander Voss. I aim to confuse, until the treaty writes itself out of pity." Their banter was short-lived. A guard approached and whispered something in Sailari's ear. Her expression changed. Not fear. Something sharper, calculating. She dismissed the guard and turned back to Kalen. "A message from one of your orbital ships. It seems a violent separatist group broadcasted a threat. They claim this alliance is an insult to purity." Kalen stiffened. "Is it credible?" "Too early to tell. But it will give the Council an excuse to stall further and to question my leadership." "You think they'll pull out?" "I think they'll wait for me to blink." "Then don't." She studied him for a moment, then said, "You make everything sound so simple." "I'm not the queen of an empire. I get to be simple." Back in the chamber, the tone shifted. Counselor Vreth leaned forward with the confidence of someone about to lob a verbal grenade. "We question the human suitability as representative. He lacks proper solemnity. He is distracting." Kalen smiled politely. "Guilty as charged. I'm terrible at solemnity, but I'm excellent at not starting wars." Vreth growled again. It was beginning to feel personal. Sailari, still seated in silence, finally lifted one hand. The commander was chosen by the Alliance for his unique approach. His results, not his decorum, will determine his success. A ripple of surprise swept the chamber, not because of her words, but because of the subtle shift in how she said commander. Not as a title, almost as a name. Vreth snarled, "You protect him too closely, my queen. And you seek reasons to fear him because you cannot understand him," she replied smoothly. Later, when the session finally adjourned and the diplomats filtered out in tight clusters of whispered suspicion, Kalen walked beside Sailari through the long silver corridor back toward their quarters. "You really went a bat for me in there," he said. "I told the truth. You're getting good at sarcasm." She glanced at him. "Or maybe I'm beginning to appreciate yours." The hallway paused as an automated platform arrived to lift them to the upper floors. They stepped aboard. The city beyond the transparent walls stretched endlessly, lit with floating lanterns and skybridges strung like spiderwebs between colossal towers. It was beautiful, it was overwhelming, it was absolutely silent. "Can I ask you something not in the protocol guide?" Kalen said. She gave a cautious nod. "Back during the ceremony you said, 'no looking.' Was that part of the tradition?" "No." He waited, but she said nothing else. "Then why?" She looked straight ahead, her reflection faint in the glass. "Because you looked like you needed someone to say it." He swallowed, and she added softly, "I knew you'd obey it, that meant something." The platform arrived, they stepped off. "Good night, Commander," she said, formal again. "Good night, Your Majesty," he replied, then paused. "For the record, I only looked a little." Her laughter echoed all the way down the hall. The ship that descended on the human outpost wasn't announced, welcomed, or friendly. It came screaming through Gentle's upper atmosphere like a comet with issues, bearing no insignia but leaving a trail of interference that fried surveillance satellites and made every translator drone in a 100-kilometer radius spontaneously begin reciting bad violin poetry, which, according to some, was indistinguishable from the good kind. Commander Kalen Voss didn't hear about it until he was mid-bite into a simulated steak that tasted suspiciously like compressed regret. The message came coded, rushed, and intercepted mid-transmission. The words hostile, separatist faction, and not a drill, appeared enough times to ruin what little remained of his appetite. He dropped his fork and stood up so fast the chair barked at him. It was violin furniture, half organic, half attitude. Moments later, he was in the Queen's war chamber, a room designed for conflict but furnished like a meditation retreat. Celari stood before a wide projection of the outer rim, flanked by shifting holograms of orbital traffic and data clusters pulsing in real time. Her eyes were narrowed, and her arms crossed, not in defensiveness, but in the restrained posture of someone calculating every possible consequence. "They hit a comms relay and 2 atmospheric stabilizers," she said as he entered. "Minimal casualties, but enough to send a message." "They want to break the alliance," Kalen guessed. "They want to make me look weak," she corrected. "They think your presence compromises our sovereignty." "Well, I did embarrass myself during the last council dinner by accidentally praising your wine decanter. Turns out it was an ancient funerary urn." Celari didn't blink. "My ancestors would have found it amusing. They were notoriously drunk. I'm really starting to like your family." The humor hung between them for only a moment before the reality returned, stark and immediate. The projection zoomed in on the outpost, charred soil, one collapsed habitat dome, and a medical tent pulsing red. "They want me to condemn the humans," she said, "publicly, demand your withdrawal." "I assume you told them to take a long walk on a short grav ramp." "I told them I would visit the site myself." Kalen blinked. "You're going with me." "It's the only way. Our presence together proves unity. It also means they can't spin this as weakness. And here I thought I was the reckless one in this partnership." Celari gave a faint smirk. "You are. I'm merely matching your tempo." They departed that evening in a vessel, neither violin nor human, one of the first co-engineered prototypes meant to symbolize shared technological growth. The controls responded with equal disdain to both of them, and the onboard AI had the sarcastic personality of a retired philosopher. During atmospheric entry, Kalen sat in the co-pilot's seat, tapping nervously on the console. "You sure they won't shoot at us?" 79%. "That's not terrible. Your species accepts coins with lower odds." "True, and those usually just buy disappointment and vending machine sandwiches." The ship touched down on scorched terrain just outside the outpost perimeter. Armed guards met them, both human and violin, eyeing one another with tension that could have powered a fusion core. Celari stepped out first, cloak sweeping dramatically behind her, either by royal design or because the wind had a flair for the theatrical. Kalen followed, adjusting his belt and trying not to look like he'd rather be anywhere else. A young violin boy ran past them, waving something shiny. "Careful," Kalen warned. "That better not be unexploded ordnance." "It's a snack crystal," one of the medics said, shrugging. "Kids love chewing on those, terrible dental implications." The devastation wasn't total, but it was targeted. Precision strikes meant to disable without completely destroying. A message of warning, not annihilation. In the command tent, Kalen and Celari met with survivors. One human engineer with soot on his face grumbled. First the power grid went down, then the toilets, and then the food processors switched every flavor to lemon disappointment. "Classic sabotage," Kalen said. A violin soldier approached, helmet under one arm. She looked at Celari and then at Kalen. "Permission to speak candidly, Your Majesty." "Granted. You should not have brought him here." Kalen raised a hand. "I'm right here, by the way." "With ears." "You are the reason this happened," she said, unmoved. "You represent change. That makes you dangerous. I also represent sarcasm and breakfast pastries. But sure, let's go with dangerous." Celari stepped forward, voice cold. "Commander Voss is under my protection. His presence here is not the cause of division. It is the beginning of its cure." The soldier hesitated, then saluted and walked away. Kalen exhaled slowly. "She's going to try to poison me, isn't she?" "Violins rarely use poison. We find it impersonal." They toured the site, checked the stabilizers, interviewed guards and medics. Every answer confirmed what they already knew. Someone wanted the Alliance to fracture, and they'd done it with precise violence and the subtlety of a flamethrower in a linen closet. That night, they camped beneath the stars. Violin custom dictated one night of open sky for reflection after violence. Kalen sat by a thermal emitter, roasting something that might have been meat. "You ever think," he said, "that all this, the treaties, the diplomacy, the fancy ceremonies, it's just theater?" "All theater is truth," Celari replied. "The costumes change, the actors stumble, but the script always says something. You sure you're not secretly a poet? My family would disapprove. I'm starting to think your family would disapprove of everything." She looked at him then, eyes reflecting the twin moons above. "You disarm people." "I wear them down," Kalen corrected. "It's a different strategy." "It works." He poked the meat. "You think anyone's watching us out here?" "Always." "And yet you didn't say no looking this time." She smiled. "Because this time I'm the one looking." Kalen nearly dropped the skewer into the emitter. The formal accusation came at dawn, delivered not by emissaries or drones, but by a projection that blinked into life in the center of Queen Celari's personal quarters. Kalen had been mid-sip of a questionably spiced violin morning beverage when the image of Counselor Vreth materialized, looking as though he'd been carved from ice and arrogance in equal measure. "Queen Celari," the projection announced, "it is the judgment of the Violin High Council that sufficient cause has arisen to suspect your collaboration in the sabotage of the Human Violin Accord. Effective immediately, your powers as negotiator are suspended. You are to be confined to quarters until a tribunal can assess your conduct." Kalen choked on his drink. "Wait, what?" The projection ignored him rude, as usual, and vanished without ceremony, leaving behind a silence so thick it could have been mined for minerals. Celari stood motionless, not stunned but deliberate, her hands clasped behind her back, her gaze fixed not on where Vreth had been, but slightly to the left, where the morning sun filtered through semi-transparent walls and painted her floor in fractured golden light. "They're making their move," she said at last. "By accusing you of treason," Kalen asked, lowering his cup. "That's like accusing a reactor core of being too energetic. They don't want me removed, they want you removed. I'm just the lever. And this tribunal. A formality. I hate formalities. They hate you more." A squad of guards arrived within the hour. Violin Royal Guard, not hostile, but tight-lipped and tense, like the sort of people who practice standing very still in front of exploding things. They escorted Celari without restraint, as though protocol demanded a performance of obedience more than actual force. She went quietly, though she glanced back at Kalen once, and in that single glance passed more warning than any encrypted communique could have managed. He watched her disappear down the corridor, then turned to the guard still posted at the entrance. "I need to speak to the High Council." "Not authorized," the guard replied. "Fine, I need to speak to your commanding officer." "Not authorized. Can I at least go to the bathroom without triggering a planetary alert?" The guard hesitated. "That was a joke," Kalen added, stepping back with hands raised. "Mostly." The next hour involved a great deal of pacing. 2 attempts to contact the Alliance through secure channels, both mysteriously blocked, and 1 unsuccessful effort to hack the palace communications terminal using his outdated command, override chip, and a spoon. When the spoon melted, dramatically, he took that as a sign he needed help, which was how he ended up in the palace kitchens, bribing a royal chef with freeze-dried nut paste and half a song about Alliance security protocols set to the tune of a violin drinking chant. The chef, who went by Jor and had 8 fingers and absolutely no patience for politics, smuggled Kalen into the servant corridors behind the tribunal chamber using a pastry cart and a high tolerance for absurdity. "This is either brilliant," Kalen whispered from beneath the linen covering, "or the dumbest thing I've done since mistaking a diplomatic sash for a table runner." "You humans talk too much," Jor muttered. wheeling him past a security checkpoint with nothing but a nod and a tray of distraction soufflés. From his hiding place, Kalen overheard snippets of tribunal discussion, accusations of betrayal, allegations that Salari had withheld intelligence, that she'd permitted Kalen access to restricted data systems, that she'd laughed at his jokes, a detail mentioned 3 times as though mirth itself were treasonous. The tribunal was being stacked, not for truth, but for narrative. She wasn't just being framed, she was being written out. And Kalen Voss wasn't going to let that happen. Later that evening, disguised in ceremonial robes 2 sizes too long, and a veil that smelled suspiciously like incense and mothballs, Kalen snuck into the Royal Archive wing. If he could find the calm logs between the saboteurs and the Violin military, he could expose the setup. "I can't believe I'm doing this in a bathrobe," he muttered, slipping past a sleeping curator bot with a snore module set to Moonlight Breeze. He accessed the archives using a retinal spoof he'd built out of a contact lens and a borrowed flashlight. What he found chilled him more than the air-conditioned vaults, a direct data trail from Counselor Vreth to the Separatists. Encrypted but there, a call placed before the outpost attack, one Salari had never seen. "I've got you, you smug ice cube." The escape wasn't as clean. Kalen tripped 2 silent alarms and had to fight off a security drone with a rolled-up treaty and some creative language. He fled through the sculpture gardens, hijacked a diplomatic transport by pressing every button until something beeped go, and made it to the tribunal hall just as the verdict was being read. He burst through the door like a badly dressed comet, robe flapping, hair windswept, and absolutely out of breath. "Objection!" he shouted. Everyone stared. "This isn't a courtroom," Vreth said coldly. "You are not permitted to speak." Funny, neither were the facts apparently. He tossed the data crystal into the central display, and the hologram bloomed into existence. Encrypted logs, location pings, and, most damningly, Vreth's voice giving authorization for strategic disruption of Alliance goodwill operations. Gasps, murmurs, a very undignified sputter from Counselor Lethes. Salari turned to him, unreadable. Then, "You always arrive like that." "Only on special occasions." It wasn't over quickly. The council would need days to digest the scandal, weeks to rewrite their pride. But Salari's confinement ended that moment, and Kalen, for once, was not escorted out in shackles or pastry carts. Back in her quarters, she faced him across a quiet room. "You risked your life. I've risked it for less. You risked diplomatic disaster. I once risked it all for a burnt sandwich and a bet. This was a clear upgrade." She shook her head, but she was smiling now. "I'm starting to think," he said, "that you're looking again." This time, she didn't deny it. The final ceremony was held in the Sky Vault, an open-air chamber suspended by magnetic spires above the Capitol, encased in a transparent dome where stars winked in all directions. Protocol dictated that both parties arrive separately, accompanied by ceremonial guards, and attended by an entire choir of drones, humming in a frequency that Kalen suspected triggered patriotism and mild migraines. He arrived first, wearing a formal Alliance uniform that had been pressed to within an inch of its synthetic life. For once, he'd combed his hair. Mostly. The translator node in his ear had been upgraded to handle violent subtext, which meant it now occasionally whispered, "That's a trap," whenever someone smiled politely. Salari entered moments later, robed in flowing iridescence, every movement a poem. Her hair was bound with interwoven metal strands, and she wore a ring on her left ear, the violin symbol of completion. She met his eyes, then stepped into place beside him with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived a tribunal, a coup attempt, and an accidental pudding fire started by Kalen 2 nights prior. The High Council, now trimmed of its more dramatic elements, observed from a respectful distance. Vreth, unsurprisingly, had taken a sudden leave of absence to study the inner moons of solitude, or, as Kalen put it, hide in shame while journaling aggressively. The The rite of convergence was to be repeated, this time, symbolically performed by both parties, shedding not literal garments but pieces of ceremonial armor designed to represent old tensions. Kalen had argued for a simpler approach, perhaps hats, but Salari had insisted on tradition, albeit with modifications. "You ready?" he whispered. She nodded. "Just try not to trip this time." That was one time. One very slick floor. They stood before the assembly, removed the ceremonial armlets and placed them on the shared altar between them. Then came the moment of vows, not romantic, but diplomatic, meant to bind not hearts but intentions. The drones recorded every syllable, broadcasting live across systems. "I, Commander Kalen Voss, representative of the Terran Alliance," he began, voice steady despite the lump in his throat, "do commit to the peace we have forged. Not with silence but with understanding. Not by removing what makes us different but by celebrating it, and maybe occasionally making fun of it, respectfully." A faint ripple of laughter passed through the chamber. Even the drones paused for a beat. Salari followed, her tone quiet but resonant. "I, Queen Salari of Virla, do accept the burden and beauty of this alliance. I recognize our history, fractured, scarred, and choose, despite it, to walk forward, together, even if our steps sometimes land out of sync." They sealed the rite with a clasp of hands. Hers was cool and steady. His warm and a little sweaty. A moment of silence followed. Then applause. The kind that started slow and unsure, then rose like a tide, sweeping across the skyvault with genuine awe. Later, after the formalities dissolved and diplomats dispersed like cautious birds returning to familiar nests, Kalen and Salari stood alone on the upper balcony, looking down at the city's lights. The magnetic scaffolds hummed beneath them like a heartbeat. "You know," he said, resting his hands on the railing, "6 weeks ago I thought violins were terrifying and emotionally unreadable. And now?" she asked, arms folded as the wind tugged at her robe. "Now I know they're terrifying, emotionally unreadable, and have a weird obsession with ceremonial citrus. We believe lemon sharpens memory. It sharpens your eyes, too. I nearly wept in that council meal." She smiled, then looked out toward the distant stars. "You changed something." "So did you." "I meant in me." He turned. She wasn't smiling now, not quite. But her gaze was soft, and her ears angled slightly back, a violent expression he had come to recognize as vulnerability wrapped in stubborn pride. "You let me see you," she said. "Not just the negotiator, the man behind the jokes. The human who cared enough to break into an archive wearing ceremonial drapes." "Those were robes," he said, "very sacred, possibly cursed." "You looked ridiculous." "I looked heroic."